They told you the Crusades were the West's shame, that the Crusaders were fanatics who massacred in God's name, that it was a war of hatred. But nobody told you why it started in the first place. This isn't a story about saints or barbarians. It's the story of a world where everyone was guilty and everyone believed they fought for good. Before you judge the Crusaders, hear them out. Before you condemn the Crusades, learn what ignited them. Because this story doesn't begin in Jerusalem. It begins in desert dust and in a world that forgot why it started praying with a sword in hand. Before we travel back in time, leave a thumbs up if you like stories that show the world as it truly was. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future journeys into the past. Ready? Let's begin. On the 8th of June, 632, in a modest chamber in Medina, a man lay dying. Muhammad, a merchant from Mecca, a wandering preacher, and then prophet of a new faith, rested in the arms of his wife, Aisha. Fever had ravaged his body for days. He was 63 years old. In that era, already an old man. Nobody knew then that his death would trigger an avalanche no one could stop. Not the cross, but the Crescent would set the world ablaze. Not Rome's sword, but the desert's fire would flow toward the cities. Arabia, before Muhammad appeared on history's stage, was a mosaic of tribes, religions, and languages. Bedouins wandered the deserts, living from herding and plunder. Trading cities, Mecca and Yathrib, grew rich from caravans carrying spices, frankincense, and myrrh. Christian monks meditated in caves. Jewish communities tilled the soil in oases. At Mecca's heart stood the Kaaba, a black stone cube, a holy place surrounded by 360 idols. Al-Lat, Manat, Al-Uzza, Hubal. Each tribe had its own god. The highest among them was called Allah, God. But he was merely one of many. North of Arabia stretched Byzantium, a 1,000-year empire that considered itself Rome's heir. To the east lay Sassanid Persia, equally ancient, a proud standing power. Both empires had just ended a war lasting 26 years. Destroyed cities, famine, plague, thousands fallen. Byzantium and Persia survived, but were exhausted. And between them, on the desert's forgotten margin, lay Arabia, forgotten by all. And from there, the tsunami would come. 40 years earlier, Muhammad, then an ordinary merchant from Mecca, began preaching that God is one, and all idols mere illusion. The great merchants of Mecca saw him as a threat. Their wealth came from pilgrimages to the Kaaba full of gods, and this new faith could destroy it. Persecution began, mockery, violence. Finally, Muhammad fled Mecca with a group of believers to Yathrib. This event was called the Hijra, the flight, the beginning of a new time. The city he reached was named Medina, the city of the Prophet. From this moment, Muslims count their calendar. In Medina, Muhammad ceased being merely a preacher. He became a state leader, judge, and commander. He forged alliances, fought opponents, and then conquered. 2 years before his death, he returned to Mecca as victor. He cleansed the Kaaba of idols and dedicated it to the one God. Arabia, for the first time in history, was united under one banner. And then, when it seemed history was just beginning, Muhammad died. His death was shock. Even before the Prophet's body was prepared for burial, a council of elders gathered in Medina. His 3 closest companions, Abu Bakr, Umar, and Abu Ubaidah, debated who would assume leadership after the Prophet. They knew that without immediately choosing a successor, Arabia would collapse within days. After long discussion, Umar, once a warrior, now Muhammad's closest friend, pledged loyalty to Abu Bakr. Thus, Abu Bakr became the first caliph, the Prophet's successor. but many refused to recognize this. Some tribes believed their oath of loyalty expired with Muhammad's death. Why pay zakat to someone who isn't a prophet? They asked. Others went further. They proclaimed new prophets, their own messengers of God. The most dangerous, Musaylima al-Kadhdhab, later called the liar by Muslims, gathered an army of 40,000 men. Arabia burned again. These were the Ridda Wars, wars of apostasy, where each day decided the young Islamic community's survival. Abu Bakr, the first caliph, didn't hesitate. He chose the sword. He organized 11 corps and gave command to one of that era's most fearsome warriors, Khalid ibn al-Walid, called the Sword of God. Khalid marched with an army into the desert's heart to crush the rebels. The first battle at Zu Chisa ended in victory. Hibal, brother of the rebel prophet Tulayha, died. A month later at Buzaka, Khalid won again. But the rebels didn't surrender. 4 months after Muhammad's death came the bloodiest clash, the Battle of Yamama. 13,000 of the caliph's warriors faced 40,000 of Musaylima's rebels. The clash was brutal, chaotic, without mercy. They fought for every stone, every wall. The final stage played out in a walled garden called Hadiqat al-Maut, the Garden of Death. When the dust settled, Musaylima was dead. But the price was terrible. Over 1,200 Muslims died, including 360 Hufaz, men who knew the Quran by heart. Their deaths shook the caliph. Abu Bakr ordered all verses collected and written in one place before they vanished forever. Thus was born the seed of what we know today as the Quran. The following year, the last pockets of rebellion were crushed. Arabia, for the first time in centuries, was united. Historian Fred M. Donner wrote many centuries later, "The suppression of the Ridda Wars transformed the community of faith into a new power, ready to flood the world with a wave of conquests." This was no longer a desert sect. This was a state, and an army that would soon march toward empires that had recently looked upon Arabs with contempt. Arabia was ready, but the world was not, because the tsunami had already begun. When Muhammad traded spices in Mecca, bells rang for Mass in Damascus. Monks and scribes in Alexandria copied classics and church fathers. Theology and medicine were taught in Syriac and Edessa. In Antioch, they argued about Christ's nature. And in Jerusalem, pilgrims from around the world came to touch the Holy Sepulchre. This was a world we'd call civilized. The late 6th and early 7th centuries saw the entire Middle East densely saturated with Christianity. The Byzantine Empire reached Syria and Egypt, encompassing 4 of the 5 major capitals of the ancient church. Constantinople was the empire's capital and one of Christianity's centers. Alexandria in Egypt was famed for scholars and schools. Antioch in Syria was where Christ's disciples were first called Christians, and Jerusalem remained the holy city. These 4 capitals, along with Rome in the west, formed what was later called the Pentarchy, a model of church capital primacy shaped in Justinian's era and refined in subsequent centuries. The Christian East then experienced a flowering of learning and culture. In urban and monastic centers, schools, scriptoria, and libraries flourished. Greek dominated, the language of Byzantine theology and liturgy. But Coptic in Egypt and Syriac and other Aramaic varieties in Syria and Mesopotamia remained alive. On the Persian frontier operated the center at Gundishapur, often described as one of the world's earliest academic complexes. Its translation and medical tradition would later become important for scholars of the Islamic world. In Syria and Mesopotamia, the schools of Edessa and Nisibis gained fame. Edessa, whose spiritual patron was Ephraim the Syrian, and Nisibis, transferred and developed after border changes, became the center of the Church of the East, combining theology, philosophy, and medical practice. In Egypt, on Sinai, and in Wadi al-Natrun, monks copied and commented on church fathers' writings and classical texts. St. Catherine's Monastery on Sinai, founded under Justinian, still preserves one of the world's richest collections of early Christian manuscripts in many languages, testimony that even the empire's peripheries were bearers of high culture. Before Islam's arrival, most of Egypt's, Syria's, and Palestine's population was Christian, with strong Coptic, Syriac, and Greek communities. And in Mesopotamia, an extensive network of the Church of the East. Sassanid Persia remained a Zoroastrian state, but a very large Christian community lived there. One could speak of one of the largest Christian concentrations outside the Roman Byzantine Empire's borders. In Arabia itself, far from power centers, Christian and Jewish communities existed, particularly in the south and east, though the entire peninsula was dominated by various tribal traditions and polytheistic cults. When Muhammad grew up in Mecca, this Christian East lived its own rhythm, and the Crescent was only rising. The end of the long Byzantine-Persian War brought a moment's respite, but also revealed their exhaustion. And precisely then, still during Muhammad's lifetime, came the first clashes on the frontier. At the Battle of Mu'tah, Muslim forces clashed with Arab allies of Byzantium and a Byzantine garrison. And the expedition to Tabuk didn't evolve into battle, but showed Arabia's new political energy direction. These episodes were a foretelling of transformation whose consequences nobody could then estimate. The uniting Arab tribes began playing for stakes whose consequences Europe and Asia would see in the next generation. Nobody suspected that within a dozen years, the region's map would change beyond recognition, and half of this Christian world would pass under new rule. After the Prophet's death, Abu Bakr lived only briefly. 2 years later, he died, and his successor became Umar ibn al-Khattab. Tall, stern, with a gaze hard as steel, he had once been one of Muhammad's fiercest enemies. Now he stood as his heir and one of Earth's most powerful men. In his hands, the caliphate ceased being a community of believers and became a growing empire. Umar believed Islam couldn't survive within desert boundaries, that fighting in God's name wasn't only defense, but duty. Jihad gained new dimension. It wasn't just to defend the faith, but carry it forward. Khalid ibn al-Walid, the Prophet's former general, called the Sword of God, received orders not to suppress rebellions, but to strike two empires simultaneously, Byzantium and Persia, a task bordering on madness. The Arabs had no heavy cavalry or siege engines, but they had something their opponents had long lost: faith, speed, and desert discipline. The first target was Syria, Byzantium's pearl. Shortly after Arabia's unification, Muslim detachments moved north. The Byzantines dismissed these raids until they became serious threats. In one of the first great battles, Khalid's army crushed imperial forces in Palestine. Later, after a forced march through the desert, he attacked from behind, executing a maneuver still considered a strategic masterpiece. The Byzantines never expected anyone could cross such distance in heat and without water. Soon after, Damascus fell. The city defended itself for many months, but when the gates finally opened, history walked in. For Emperor Heraclius, this was the first but not last defeat. Damascus became a symbol of Byzantine East's beginning of the end. The Arabic term for these conquests, futuhat, openings, sounded beautiful and lofty. But for those who saw burning cities, it meant something entirely different. Siege, assault, slaughter, and onward to the next city. The Byzantine chronicler Theophanes wrote, "The Saracens came like a locust swarm, destroying everything in their path." Patriarch Sophronius, observing this from Jerusalem, said in sermons, They burn churches and villages, kill without mercy. In his voice rang the fear of a man who felt his world ending. Several years later, at the Yarmouk River, unfolded the battle that decided the entire East's fate. On one side stood the imperial army, mighty, heavily armored, composed of Greeks, Armenians, Slavs, Franks, and Arab allies from the Ghassanid tribe. On the other, a much smaller Muslim army under Khalid ibn al-Walid's command. The clash lasted many days. Wind carried dust and sand, choking men, limiting visibility. In the first hours, the Byzantines had advantage, but Khalid didn't retreat. At the decisive moment, he ordered his elite cavalry, the mobile guard, to strike the enemy's wings. The Byzantines' left flank collapsed first, then the right. Muslim cavalry swept in an arc, closing the imperial army in a death ring. When the wind died, thousands of bodies covered the plain. Fleeing imperial soldiers fell into the Yarmouk Gorge's chasms. The place meant to be their retreat route became a mass grave. Heraclius, receiving news of defeat, left Antioch. According to chronicles, bidding farewell to Syria, he said, "Peace be upon you, O Syria, magnificent land of the enemy." The Battle of Yarmouk ended 7 centuries of Byzantine rule in the Middle East. Damascus and Hims passed into Muslim hands. A year later, Jerusalem fell, and soon after, Egypt. The world that had been Christian for centuries changed face within one generation. John W. Jandora, historian from the Journal of Asian History, later wrote, "The Yarmouk clash deserves a place among the most important battles in world history." He was right. This was the battle that cut history like a sword into what came before and what followed. The bells fell silent, and on walls where crosses once hung, for the first time rang the muezzin's voice. After Byzantium's decisive defeat at Yarmouk, the Rashidun Caliphate's army under Abu Ubaida's command moved south. The target was Jerusalem, the holy city, the last bastion of the Christian East. The siege lasted 4 to 6 months. It wasn't a brutal assault, but a suffocating blockade. The Arabs surrounded the walls, cutting roads and food supplies. Time would do the rest. Sources noted, instead of merciless assaults on the city, they decided to continue the siege until the Byzantines exhausted supplies and a bloodless surrender could be negotiated. But bloodless is a relative word. Within Jerusalem's walls, despair grew. Food, water, hope ran short. People ate whatever they could find: leather straps, grass, parchment scraps. In cisterns, foul water stank, and in alleys lay bodies of those who didn't survive another night. Diseases spread faster than news of rescue. Leading the city stood Patriarch Sophronius, Saint Sophronius, born around 560, patriarch since 634, a learned and pious man. When Arabs approached the city, he gathered all the holiest relics, including the true cross, and secretly sent them to Constantinople. He knew Jerusalem might fall. He wanted at least the cross to survive. At Christmas 634, he delivered a sermon that passed into history. We, however, because of our countless sins and grave transgressions, cannot see these things and are prevented from entering Bethlehem. Reluctantly, against our will, we are forced to stay home, bound not by close bodily ties, but by fear of the Saracens. And he added with bitterness, immediately from the Philistines. And now the army of godless Saracens has occupied divine Bethlehem and blocks our passage there, threatening slaughter and destruction if we leave this holy city and dare approach our beloved Bethlehem. In these words rings despair and resignation, awareness that the world they knew was ending. Sophronius agreed to surrender, but only on condition he do so personally, before the caliph. Not before a general, not before a governor. Before Umar ibn al-Khattab himself, Muhammad's successor. This condition made Jerusalem's conquest legendary. In early April, some sources say 637, others 638, Umar arrived in Palestine. First to Jabiya, then to Jerusalem itself. His journey became a symbol of humility. He rode with one donkey and one servant, dressed in simple, dusty robes. When he entered the city, nobody knew which of the two men was the caliph and which the servant. They switched places so often. Sophronius came out to meet him. Two old men, two leaders of two worlds, met at the Jaffa gate. Sophronius led the caliph through the city, showing holy places. When they reached the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the patriarch invited Umar to pray inside. He refused. "Do you understand, O patriarch," he reportedly said, "why I didn't pray in your church? If I had, my people would claim this place as theirs. They'd take it from you, citing my example." Instead, Umar prayed on the steps before the sanctuary. Where he knelt, a small mosque was later built, a symbol of his decision and the beginning of a new order. Soon, a document was written, the Pact of Umar. According to chronicler al-Tabari, its content read, "In the name of the merciful, compassionate God." This is the security assurance that God's servant Umar, commander of the faithful, gave to the people of Alia, Jerusalem. He gave them security assurance for themselves, their property, their churches, their crosses, the sick and healthy of the city, and for all rituals belonging to their religion. Their churches will not be inhabited by Muslims and will not be destroyed. Neither they, nor the land on which they stand, nor their cross, nor their property will be damaged. They won't be forcibly converted. Jerusalem's people must pay taxes, jizya, like people of other cities, and must expel Byzantines and bandits. Those who wish to leave with the Byzantines, take their property, and abandon their churches and crosses, will be safe until they reach their place of refuge. For Jerusalem's people, this was the end of the world they knew. For Umar, the beginning of a new order. Muslims took the city. Jews were allowed to return after nearly 500 years of exile, and Christian bells fell silent. They were replaced by muezzin songs from minarets rising on former temple courtyards. Christian chronicles recorded that Sophronius didn't live long. He died shortly after capitulation, according to witnesses, with a broken heart. He saw his city fall, saw crosses fall from towers, and holy places pass into foreign hands. Exhausted by hunger, Christians finally agreed to open the city gates on condition the enemy spare the holy places. But this condition wasn't met. The life of Sophronius later wrote. Why did they surrender? Byzantium was ruined after wars with Persia. The Battle of Yarmouk destroyed the remnants of its army. Heraclius fled. Nobody had strength or will to come with help. Jerusalem was cut off, hungry, full of refugees and dread. The patriarch knew further resistance would mean slaughter. Thus the holy city passed into the caliphate's hands. Jerusalem, city of prayer, blood, and tears, fell silent. Crosses were removed from bell towers, and new words rang out. Allahu Akbar. Egypt was Byzantium's jewel, the empire's granary, source of grain, silver, and ships. A land that for 6 centuries fed Constantinople. For Amr ibn al-As, the prophet's soldier, this was priceless booty. 3 years after Muhammad's death, on his own initiative, he moved west. Byzantine Egypt was asleep. Its army, composed mainly of local Copts, had a police character. The empire, destroyed by wars with Persia, considered the province safe. This was illusion. In December, Amr crossed Sinai with 4,000 horsemen. The first city, Pelusium, resisted. It was taken by storm, its defenders killed to the last man. Coptic Bishop John of Nicaea recorded, "The Muslims captured Pelusium and deprived of life all who were there, after which they went further, destroying everything in their path." After victory at Bebes, the Arabs moved not toward Alexandria, but to the fortress of Babylon, at today's Cairo's location. The siege lasted 6 months. Hunger, disease, and the stench of corpses filled the walls. When the garrison surrendered, John of Nicaea noted, "The Muslims didn't keep the capitulation conditions. They took the fortress's riches and led away many captives. The Byzantines were too weak to fight further. Heraclius died. Constantinople was far. To the north waited Alexandria, the capital, center of knowledge, Christianity's second city. The siege lasted 14 months. Alexandria starved, and bodies floated down canals. Finally, on the 17th of September, 642, Governor Theodore signed capitulation, an 11-month truce, tribute, and evacuation. On the 29th of September, Amr ibn al-As marched into Alexandria. Thus ended 671 years of Roman rule in Egypt. John of Nicaea wrote, "The Muslims took control of all Egypt. They oppressed the people with taxes. They forced many to deny their Christian faith. Initially, Copts accepted the new authority with indifference, tired of Byzantine persecution, but they quickly understood that peace was only another form of yoke. Taxes, jizya, compulsion, the everyday reality of the new order. Patriarch Benjamin, who returned from exile, initially enjoyed Amr's favor. Then his church bent under the weight of tributes and caliphate authority. Historian Hugh Kennedy wrote, "Of all early Muslim conquests, that of Egypt was the fastest and most complete. Rarely in history could such enormous change happen so quickly and be so lasting." But over Alexandria still hung one shadow, the legend of the burned library. For centuries they repeated that when Amr captured Alexandria, Caliph Umar ordered the great library burned. He supposedly said, "If these books agree with the Quran, they're unnecessary. If they contradict it, they must be destroyed." According to later accounts, scrolls burned in bathhouses for half a year. It sounds dramatic, but it's untrue. No contemporary source, Arabic, Byzantine, or Coptic, mentions burning the library. The story appears only 6 centuries later, with Ibn al-Kifti in the year 1227. Bernard Lewis wrote, "Surely the time has come for Caliph Umar and Amr ibn al-As to be finally acquitted of this charge." The destruction, not creation, of the myth was European scholarship's achievement. The Encyclopedia Britannica confirms, "The great library of Alexandria ceased to exist long before the Arab conquest of Egypt." So when Amr ibn al-As entered the city, there were no more scholars from the Mausion, no scrolls, no halls where the ancient world's wise voices spoke. Only ruins and silence remained. Egypt, heart of learning and Byzantium's granary, was now in the Caliphate's hands. The year 698. The Byzantine Empire was dying, and on the western edge of the Mediterranean Sea played out the final act of a drama ending Rome's 1,000-year presence in Africa. Carthage, Hannibal's city, capital of Byzantine province Africa, was only a shadow of its former glory. Behind its walls still held soldiers and inhabitants who had nowhere to flee. Streets were empty, the port silent, and in houses rang prayers and sobs as news of approaching Arabs echoed through the city's ruins. Leading them was Hassan ibn al-Nu'man, known in chronicles as the honest old man. He had 40,000 men, soldiers of the Umayyad Caliphate, sent by Caliph Abd al-Malik from Egypt to finally break Roman Africa. The first attack was lightning fast. Hassan burst into the city, and terrified inhabitants surrendered to avoid slaughter. The wealthy fled to Sicily, Italy, and Greece. The rest, the poor, sick, elderly, remained. The city fell silent. Byzantium, however, didn't intend to give up Carthage without a fight. Emperor Leontius sent a fleet from Sicily with Gothic veterans, sailors of the Caribisianoi theme, and 2 commanders, John the Patrician and Tiberius Apsimaris. In a bold nighttime attack, their ships broke through port chains and retook the city. Edward Gibbon later wrote, "The Christians landed, citizens greeted the sign of the cross, and winter was unproductively wasted dreaming of liberation." But the liberation dream was short. Hassan gathered new forces. Reinforcements arrived from Egypt, and the Byzantines, shackled by their own bureaucracy, still waited for orders from Constantinople. When they finally moved, it was too late. Arabs surrounded the city. John the Patrician, seeing no chance, ordered people evacuated by sea. Hassan didn't intend to leave behind ruins that could revive again. He issued orders to destroy Carthage. Roman Carthage was destroyed, its walls torn down, aqueducts cut, ports made unusable. The city burned, and with it, the last memory of Roman Africa. The Byzantines tried once more. The last battle at Utica ended in defeat. Surviving units fled to Corsica, Sicily, and Crete. John the Patrician was murdered by his own comrade in arms, Tiberius Apsimaris, who upon returning to the capital seized the throne and became Emperor Tiberius III. Emperor Leontius, overthrown and mutilated, spent the rest of his life in a monastery, without a nose, without power, without dignity. Thus began an era chroniclers called the 20 Years of Anarchy. The loss of Africa was a death blow. After Egypt, Byzantium lost its second granary, a land from which flowed grain, gold, and taxes. The empire was losing oxygen. Carthage's fall meant more than territorial loss. It was the end of the world of St. Augustine and Cyprian, the end of Latin Christianity in Africa. At first, Arabs allowed Christians to live, at the price of taxes and submission. But the wealthy fled, and with their departure, cities died. Archaeologists found traces of sudden fires and layers of ash from the late 7th century. Thus ended Carthage. The church remained within walls, without monasteries, without missions, without voice. The Berbers, for centuries treated by Romans as second-class people, accepted Islam, seeing in it equality they'd never known before. For some it was an act of faith, for others a way to stop paying jizya and kharaj, taxes on unbelievers. Yet Christianity didn't die immediately. Sources mention a bishop in Kairouan in the year 1150, a community in Algeria's mountains in 1114, 4 dioceses still in the 14th century. Ibn Khaldun wrote of Christians from Nefzawa, the last who endured in hiding until the early 15th century. With Carthage's fall appeared a new figure who passed into legend. The Arabs called her Al-Kahina, the prophetess, witch, queen. She ruled the Jarawa tribes from the Ores Mountains. Some claimed she was Christian, others Jewish. Everyone feared her. When Hassan marched against her, he met defeat. At the Nini River, Kahina crushed his army. Arab chronicles call this place Wadi al-Bala, the Valley of Disaster. Hassan lost hundreds of men and fled to Cyrenaica. Kahina ruled several years until Hassan returned with new forces. At Tabarka came the decisive clash. The queen fought to the end. She died when Arab horsemen surrounded her people. Her sons were captured and as Ibn Idari writes, accepted Islam to save their lives. When Hassan entered Kairouan, he asked, "Who else in Africa is capable of resisting us?" The answer was, "Only Al-Kahina. When she falls, all Maghreb will fall at your feet." And so it happened. Carthage, city of Hannibal, Augustine, and Cyprian, lay in ruins. A sea of silence covered the song of Latin psalms. North Africa, for centuries a bastion of Christianity, became the land of Islam. After the Arab invasion of Persian lands, the new Shah, Yazdegerd III, tried to save his empire. He ascended the throne when the Sasanians were only a shadow of former power. Wars with Byzantium, plagues, and Marsban revolts devastated the land. When Arabs crossed the Euphrates, many of his commanders refused obedience. The Shah gathered what army he could. 4 years after Muhammad's death came the clash that decided Persia's fate, the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah. It lasted several days. On the Euphrates banks, in burning sun, two civilizations met. On one side, heavily armored Persians in gleaming armor. On the other, light cavalry from the desert, without siege engines, but with faith that God was on their side. According to Arab chroniclers, wind blew at night, carrying dust straight into Persian faces. According to Byzantines, Muslim faith was stronger than steel. Regardless of version, the result was the same. The Persians were crushed. Their army, once the empire's pride, ceased to exist. Arabs entered Ctesiphon, the magnificent Sasanian capital. The throne hall, where Persian kings sat for 4 centuries, was plundered. The golden cloth meant to represent heaven and earth was cut to pieces and divided among soldiers. Persians fled to the Zagros Mountains, trying to create a defense line. But there was no more army, no more morale. 6 years after Qadisiyah, at the Battle of Nahavand, called by Arabs the victory of victories, the remnants of Sasanian forces were annihilated. Yazdegerd III fled further and further, through Fars, Clermont to Khorasan, where he was finally betrayed and murdered by a local satrap. Thus fell the state that for 4 centuries had been Rome's rival. Within 1 decade, Persia, proud bastion of Zoroastrianism, vanished from the map. But though the empire ceased to exist, its spirit remained. Arabs didn't only conquer Persia, they took from it everything that was best: administration, the tax system, palace etiquette, even architecture. Islam took the form Persian civilization gave it. As Bernard Lewis wrote, "The Arabs conquered Persia, but the Persians conquered Islam." For Persians themselves, however, this was the end of the world. 4 centuries later, poet Ferdowsi in the Shahnameh placed words of pain and despair in Yazdegerd's mouth. "Curse this time and this fate, that uncivilized Arabs came to make me a Muslim. Where are my warriors and priests? Where are the armies that defended Iran? Count Iran as a ruin, a den of lions and leopards. Look now in despair." After the Sasanians' defeat, Arabs moved further toward the Caucasus and Central Asia. Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan gradually yielded to new rulers. Beyond the Amu Darya River, in Transoxiana, the lands of today's Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, Arabs encountered new civilizations: Bukhara, Samarkand, the Sir Darya Valley. There they fought not with Persians, but with Turkic and Buddhist peoples who resisted for entire decades. Initial expeditions ended with tributes and treaties. But soon systematic expansion began. Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad captured Bukhara. Qutayba ibn Muslim went further to Samarkand. But there he encountered an alliance of Sogdians and the Turgesh Turks, supported by China's Tang dynasty. At the Battle of Talas, Arab forces won, stopping China's expansion westward. This victory, though seemingly local, decided Asia's future. Paper that Chinese prisoners brought from Talas soon became one of Arab civilization's foundations. Within 2 generations, Islam stretched from the Atlantic to the Himalayas. Syria conquered, Palestine conquered, Egypt conquered, North Africa conquered, Persia destroyed, Mesopotamia in Arab hands, Armenia, Georgia, Central Asia subjugated. Historian James Buchan wrote, "In speed and scope, the first Arab conquests equaled only Alexander the Great, but were far more lasting." Estimates say that within 100 years after Muhammad's death, Islam ruled over 13 million square kilometers, from the Pyrenees to the Indus. Edward Gibbon wrote, "Under the last of the Umayyads, the Arab Empire extended 200 days' journey from east to west, from the borders of Tartary and India to the shores of the Atlantic Ocean. Islam's progress spread over this space, a uniform character of customs and beliefs. All these lands, Syria, Palestine, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Persia, North Africa, were previously Christian or Zoroastrian. Their cathedrals, monasteries, theological schools fell silent. Where bells rang for Mass, muezzin's calls began to sound. Patriarch Sophronius, who only a few years earlier had surrendered Jerusalem, wrote, "The Saracens rose against us with godless audacity, plundering everything holy. O God, break their pride and restore peace." But peace didn't return. Wars, plagues, and Christianity's schism weakened the world that for centuries had been civilization's heart. So when the storm came from the desert, there was no one left to resist. And within 1 century, what had been Christ's East became Muhammad's East. Before we move to Spain, we must answer the question you're probably already asking yourself. How was this even possible? How could a handful of Arab warriors from the desert in several decades defeat 2 great empires, Byzantium and Persia, and conquer half the known world? There are several answers. American historian Fred McGraw-Donner wrote that Arab success was possible because Muhammad created not only a religion, but a state, a community united by idea, faith, and discipline. Their armies fought not only for plunder, but with conviction that they were spreading divine order. The second factor was the exhaustion of the world they invaded. Byzantium and Persia, after nearly 30 years of constant wars, were weakened like never before. Historian George Liska wrote, "The unnecessarily prolonged Byzantine-Persian conflict opened the path for Islam." There was also a religious factor. In Syria and Egypt, Christian sects, Monophysites and Nestorians, had suffered decades of persecution from Constantinople, which imposed Chalcedonian orthodoxy. For them, Arabs were the lesser evil. As Chase F. Robinson wrote, in many Syrian and Palestinian cities, local Christians opened gates, believing new rulers would let them live in peace if they paid tribute. Jews, also persecuted by Byzantines, often welcomed Muslims as saviors. For many communities, Arab conquests meant not destruction, but relief from empires that had long ceased being just. Finally, the military factor. Arab armies were small but mobile, coordinated and determined. As Robinson wrote, "The Muslims, after studying the terrain, lured Byzantines into field battle, which they usually avoided, and turned valleys into death traps. Byzantines and Persians fought like old armies, heavy, slow, with elaborate camps. Arabs fought like a storm, fast, without supply lines, surprising. And when they conquered lands, they settled on them. Entire tribes migrated from Arabia to Syria, Egypt, Iraq. Thus their rule wasn't only occupation, but became lasting change of the world." Understanding all this is crucial before we move further, because now the scene changes dramatically. From the desert, we move toward Europe's green hills. The year 711. The Strait of Gibraltar, a narrow strip of water between Africa and Europe. On the southern shore, Tangier, already in Arab hands. On the northern shore, the Visigothic kingdom plunged in chaos. King Witiza had died the year before, and his successor Roderick had to fight for the throne with a faction supporting the late ruler's son. The country was torn, nobility divided, church split. At this time, in North Africa, stationed Tariq ibn Ziyad, a Berber commander in Arab service. When he heard of civil war in Spain, he decided to act. In spring, he crossed the strait with merely 1,500 soldiers, mostly Berbers who'd just been conquered. On the 29th of April, his fleet reached Europe's rocky shore. On a high cliff, he made camp. From his name, this place still bears the name Gibraltar, Jabal Tariq, Tariq's mountain. Legend says he then delivered words that passed into history. Behind you is the sea. Before you, the enemy. There's no retreat. You can only win or die. Some chroniclers claim he ordered his ships burned to show soldiers there was no escape. This is probably myth, but captures that moment's spirit. On the 19th of July, at the Guadalete River came battle. King Roderick died, his army disintegrated, and the road north stood open. Within months, Arabs occupied Toledo, the Visigoths' former capital. Some cities surrendered voluntarily in exchange for tribute and security. Others after brief sieges. Many Christians kept their property if they accepted Muslim rule. Jews, persecuted for centuries by Visigothic rulers, welcomed the newcomers as saviors. A year later, a new commander crossed the strait, Musa ibn Nusayr, Arab governor of North Africa, with another army. He joined forces with Tariq, and together they moved further. The caliph in Damascus, al-Walid, was reportedly surprised when he learned his generals had conquered all Spain. Within a year, the Iberian Peninsula was almost entirely in Islam's hands. The new capital became Cordoba, a city that in time would become Al-Andalus's pearl. The great Mosque of Cordoba was built on the site of the former Church of St. Vincent. Seville became the second center of Arab power, and Granada its southern gate. From Spain came further expeditions through the Pyrenees into Gaul. In the year 732 came the battle that passed into legend, the Battle of Tours, also called the Battle of Poitiers. Arabs, led by Abd ar-Rahman al-Ghafiqi, clashed with Franks commanded by Charles Martel. The battle lasted several days, between the 18th and 25th of October. Franks defended in tight formation, and when night fell, Arabs considered the battle lost and withdrew. Abd ar-Rahman's death ended Islam's expansion north of the Pyrenees. But it wasn't the Franks' defeat that stopped Islam, rather the Berber revolt in North Africa and Spain, where they no longer wanted to pay tributes to Arab masters. The West trembled. The East already burned. This was 8th century reality. Within merely 80 years of Prophet Muhammad's death, Islam spread from Arabia to the Atlantic. Half the Christian world ceased to exist. Imagine waking up one day and learning you can't repair your church anymore, that you must pay a special tax only because you're not Muslim, that your son can't carry weapons and your daughter can be taken as a concubine, that you can't ride horseback, wear bright clothes, or build a house higher than your neighbor's if he's a follower of Allah. Welcome to the world of Dhimmi. The word Dhimmi comes from Arabic Ahl al-Dhimma, people of covenant, protected people. On paper, it sounded almost noble. Protection in exchange for loyalty. In practice, it was conditional protection, the right to life in exchange for submission. In Islam, the world divided into 3 circles: Dar al-Islam, the House of Islam, Muslim lands, Dar al-Harb, the house of war, unbelievers' lands to be conquered, and Ahl al-Dhimma, people of the book, Jews and Christians, allowed to endure under Islamic rule if they recognized the Prophet's sovereignty and agreed to pay. Why them specifically? Because Islam recognized Jesus and Jewish prophets as true messengers of God, though Muslims believed their teachings were distorted. Therefore, Christians and Jews weren't pagans, but recipients of earlier revelation. This gave them the right to exist, but not equality. The most important symbol of this subjugation was jizya, the life tax. Every adult man among Dhimmi had to pay it once a year. Women, children, monks, elderly, theoretically exempt, in practice often also burdened. The rich paid more, the poor less, but everyone paid. The Quran says clearly, "Fight those among the people of the book who don't believe in Allah until they pay jizya with their own hand, being humiliated." That last word, sagirun, being humiliated, was the system's heart. Collecting jizya was a public humiliation ritual. Dhimmi had to appear before an official, kneel, and he'd take the coins, sometimes striking the payer's neck so he'd feel his smallness. This gesture had symbolic meaning, a reminder of who rules and who lives only by grace. Besides jizya, there were dozens of prohibitions. Dhimmi couldn't build new churches or synagogues. Repairing old ones required authorities' permission, often delayed indefinitely. Church bells were forbidden because they disturbed Muslim prayers. Crosses had to be hidden, processions quiet and modest. Dhimmi houses couldn't be higher than Muslims' houses, and clothing had to distinguish them. Jews wore yellow markings, Christians blue, often ordered to wear black turbans or belts called giyar. Green, the Prophet's color, was forbidden. They couldn't ride horses, only donkeys or mules, never higher than a Muslim. Couldn't carry weapons. Couldn't look a Muslim in the eye. If they met him on a narrow street, they had to get out of the way. Their testimony in court had no value. A Muslim could accuse them without witnesses, and Dhimmi had no right to defend themselves. In theory, Islam forbade forced conversions. In practice, compulsion took many forms, most often economic. Jizya, the land tax kharaj, local fees and bribes for officials meant many Christians and Jews went bankrupt. Muslims paid only zakat, a much lower religious tax. The choice was simple: convert and survive, or remain faithful and grow poor. Social pressure was equally strong. Only Muslims could hold office, possess land in full legal ownership, serve in the army. Christians and Jews were excluded from administration, politics, military positions. Ambitious young people who wanted to advance had no other path. They had to accept Islam, not from faith, but from necessity. Compulsion also took more brutal forms. In some regions, rulers kidnapped Christian children, raising them in Islam. Most famous was the Ottoman devshirme system, where boys from the Balkans were taken from families, forcibly converted, and trained as janissaries, the Sultan's elite guard. Their families never saw them again. A Muslim could marry a Christian or a Jewish woman, but a Christian couldn't take a Muslim woman. That was a crime punished by death. Children from mixed unions were automatically Muslim. So Islam grew even without wars, through marriages, rapes, and assimilation. Dhimmi women were vulnerable to sexual violence. In many regions, rape of a Christian woman wasn't punished if the perpetrator was Muslim. Those who yielded to pressure and accepted Islam couldn't withdraw. Apostasy, leaving Islam, was a crime punished by death. Many converted outwardly, hoping to return to their faith later. But the law knew no retreat. Their children were already raised as Muslims. After several generations, memory of ancestors vanished. In the 12th century, the situation of Jews and Christians dramatically worsened when the Almohads came to power in Maghreb and Al-Andalus, a fanatical Berber dynasty. Its founder Abd al-Mumin issued a decree: accept Islam, leave our lands, or die. Most had nowhere to flee. Poor peasants, craftsmen, small merchants, their world was here. Ancestors' graves, churches, homes. Many spoke the words of faith profession, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, not from conviction, but from fear. Those who refused died. Some fled to Christian kingdoms of northern Spain, others to Egypt or Provence. Still others pretended to be Muslims, keeping faith secretly. They prayed in cellars, teaching children prayers in whispers. If someone reported them, death. The Almohads destroyed hundreds of churches and synagogues. Andalusia, which in the 11th century was multi-faith, in the 13th century was almost entirely Muslim. In Egypt, Copts, who for the first centuries after conquest constituted the population's majority, gradually vanished. In the 9th century, Governor Harun ibn Kumarawai ordered all Cairo churches taller than mosques destroyed. In the 11th century, Caliph al-Hakim, the same who destroyed the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, conducted systematic persecution of Christians, demolishing temples, killing clergy, forcing conversion. Thousands fled to Nubia and Ethiopia. Thousands more converted. Today, Copts constitute barely 1/10 of Egyptians. The rest are descendants of forcibly Islamized ancestors. In Syria, Mesopotamia, and Persia, the process was similar. Syriac, Aramaic, and Nestorian Christians endured long, but their numbers dwindled each century. Every uprising ended in pogroms. In the 14th century, Mongol ruler Timur Lenk massacred hundreds of thousands of Christians and Zoroastrians. The latter, former fire priests of Iran, disappeared almost completely. Those who survived fled to India, where they live today as Parsis. But Dhimmi life wasn't always hell. There were periods of relative tolerance, particularly in the Abbasid Caliphate, when Jewish and Christian doctors, translators, and merchants enjoyed relative freedom. But this tolerance was never lasting. A caliph's change, war, a fanatical imam, and the world that yesterday gave respite today turned into prison. Life as Dhimmi was thus life in the Crescent's shadow, between tolerance and fear, between survival and humiliation. With each generation, fewer people remembered that once their ancestors were masters of these lands, that church bells rang in these same cities where today only the muezzin's voice resounds. On the 26th of August, 1071, Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes knelt in the Turkish desert. His right arm was shot through. Blood soaked his armor. Before him stood Sultan Alp Arslan. Thus ended 1,000 years of empire. But let's rewind several hours, to the moment when everything was still possible. The battlefield lay near Manzikert Fortress, north of Lake Van in ancient Armenia. The Byzantine world had fought Islam for 400 years, lost Syria, Egypt, North Africa, but Anatolia, the empire's heart, source of soldiers and food, remained Byzantine. Until this day, Romanos IV was a warrior, not a politician. Tall, powerfully built, with a scar crossing his left cheek. He ascended the throne 6 years earlier after a coup. Byzantium needed a firm hand. Seljuk Turks were raiding Anatolia ever more boldly. They had to be stopped, once and for all. That year, in early winter, the emperor renewed the peace treaty with the Sultan, deliberately, as diversion. When Alp Arslan, the great Seljuk Sultan, conqueror of Persia, ruler from Syria to China's borders, marched south toward Aleppo, Romanos pushed his armies north. He left Constantinople. By summer, he reached Theodosiopolis. There, generals began to argue. Some wanted to go further, surprise the Sultan. Nicephorus Bryennius, an experienced commander, veteran of many campaigns, advised waiting, strengthening positions. Romanos chose attack. In Manzikert's vicinity, he made the mistake that decided everything. He divided the army. General Joseph Tarcheniotes got 20,000 men, Varangians, Pechenegs, Franks, and orders to besiege Cleat fortress. The emperor, with the remaining forces, marched toward Manzikert, the beginning of the end. Tarchaniot's detachment vanished. Was it crushed by the Sultan? Did it flee without fighting? Sources differ. Either way, it never returned. Romanos was left with 20,000 soldiers. The corps consisted of professional warriors, Heteria, Scolai, Strilati. Part of the Varangian Guard, Vikings and Rus, elite axemen, the emperor's last line of defense. 500 Frankish and Norman knights under Roussel de Bayeux, a mercenary from France, brutal, effective. Pecheneg cavalry that soon deserted. Turkish mercenaries from Us and Oguz tribes who went over to the enemy. Against them, Alp Arslan had about 30,000 horsemen, mainly mounted archers, mobile, deadly effective, masters of feigned retreat. Several days later, Romanos captured Manzikert without a fight. The next morning, Bryennius's patrols encountered the Sultan's detachments and withdrew. The emperor didn't believe these were main forces. He sent General Basilasis, an Armenian, tested in dozens of skirmishes, on reconnaissance. Basilasis fell into ambush, captured. The next day, Romanos's Turkish mercenaries deserted, greeting their kinsmen on the other side. Seljuks occupied the hills and waited. At dawn, Sultan Alp Arslan came before his forces. He wore a white robe like a funeral shroud. He said to his men, "If we win, glory will be ours. If we die, we go as martyrs to the garden." Then he sent envoys to Romanos with a peace proposal. He delayed. The emperor rejected them with contempt. He ordered them to convey, "There'll be no treaty. I won't return home until I've done in Islam's lands what they did in Rome's lands." When the sun stood high, the armies moved. The emperor commanded the center, infantry ranks. On the left wing, Bryennius. On the right, Theodore Aliates, a younger commander, less experienced. Reserve and rear guard were commanded by Andronikos Doukas, son of John Doukas, Romanos's greatest enemy, a man full of ambition and grievance. The Sultan arranged forces in a crescent. The crescent stretched 4 kilometers wide. Alp Arslan personally led his men. Mounted archers, heavy cavalry of ghulams, slave soldiers trained from childhood. The Byzantines marched forward. Steppe archers began shooting. Their horses moved lightly, as if dancing. The crescent's center retreated, wings shifted and circled. Classic maneuver. When Romans tried to close, Seljuks fled, luring wearing down. Byzantines fought hard. By afternoon, they even captured the Sultan's camp. But arrows fell continuously. Horses fell. Men died from exhaustion. As darkness approached, Romanos ordered withdrawal. He wanted to return to camp, feed his men, water horses. The order was misunderstood. Andronikos Doukas, commander of reserve and the emperor's enemy, turned his detachments and headed straight to camp. He left Romanos without cover. Betrayal? Panic? Nobody knows. The effect was the same. Someone shouted the emperor was dead. The rumor spread lightning fast. Panic, screams, dust, tumult. Seljuk struck. Michael Ataliates, chronicler, lawyer, eyewitness to this catastrophe, wrote, "It was like an earthquake. Screams, sweat, dust, chaos, and a horde of Turks around us." I'd never seen anything so tragic. The entire imperial army in flight, the emperor defenseless, the empire in ruin. The imperial army ceased to exist. Left wing destroyed, right in disarray, center surrounded. The Varangian Guard fought to the end, defending the emperor. All died. Romanos's horse fell, hit by an arrow. The emperor fell. Wounded in his right arm, he drew his sword and charged the enemy. He killed several before being overwhelmed. A young Ghulam, reportedly a Greek in the Sultan's service, captured him. The battle ended. 40,000 Byzantines didn't return from the field. Seljuks lost 5,000. When the captured emperor was brought before Alp Arslan, the Sultan didn't believe his eyes. This dirty, bloodied man was the ruler of Rome? Yet he was. And to everyone's surprise, Alp Arslan treated him with honor. He removed the chains, invited him to his table. For 8 days he fed him with his own hand. They talked as equals. Michael Psellos, learned courtier, Byzantine historian, recorded their conversation. The Sultan asked, "What would you do if you had me captive?" Romanos answered, "I'd probably kill you, or lead you through Constantinople's streets." Alp Arslan smiled. "My punishment will be crueler. I'll forgive you and let you live." Romanos signed peace. 1.5 million gold coins ransom, annual tribute, transfer of Manzikert, Edessa, Antioch. 1 daughter for the Sultan's son, alliance against enemies. But when he returned to his country, everything was already lost. In his absence, a coup occurred in Constantinople. Caesar John Ducas, brother of deceased Emperor Constantine X, uncle of young Michael, and his faction overthrew Romanos. They proclaimed Michael VII emperor. They locked Empress Eudokia in a monastery. The Varangian Guard took the palace. They refused to pay ransom. When Romanos learned of the betrayal, he gathered the remnants of forces. He tried to reclaim the throne. He lost. The following year, at the end of June, he was blinded with heated iron. Typical Byzantine punishment for rivals. Attaliates wrote it was done brutally, without mercy. He was exiled to a monastery on Proto Island. He died several weeks later from wounds and infection. He was 42 years old. Byzantium never recovered. Anatolia, the empire's heart, stood open. Within a decade, almost the entire central part of the country was in Turkish hands. Not because Seljuks were invincible, but because Byzantines destroyed themselves. Key understanding: this wasn't military defeat. This was political collapse. Generals fought each other, hiring Turkish mercenaries. Cities opened gates to foreigners in exchange for power. 10 years after the battle, 78,000 square kilometers of Anatolia were in Turkish hands, not through invasion, but through Byzantine civil wars. Major cities fell one by one. Nicaea, barely 80 kilometers from Constantinople, captured by Suleiman ibn Kutulmish, Alp Arslan's distant cousin, became the first capital of the Sultanate of Rum. Then Nicomedia, Konya, Caesarea, Amorion reached without resistance. 6 years after Manzikert, Suleiman founded a new state, the Sultanate of Rum. Rum meant Rome. The name said everything. Turkish rule over former Roman lands. 10 years later, the Sultan controlled the entire Anatolian plateau. 8 different rebellions within a decade. Byzantine generals hired Turks against each other. Cities voluntarily passed under Turkish control. Armenian chronicler Vardapet Aristakes, monk, witness to slaughter, wrote in despair. Byzantine armies entered Armenia 4 times in succession until they made the entire country desolate by sword, fire, and taking captives. When Seljuks saw Byzantine nobles fighting each other, they boldly arose and came against us, constantly raiding, destroying, devastating. There was so much blood that people said such slaughter hadn't happened before in Byzantium. For 10 years after the battle, a decade of chaos continued. Michael VII Ducas, unable to stop the Turkish onslaught, invited Alp Arslan as ally against rivals. A year before the Council of Piacenza, Nicephorus Botaniates, retired general, power-hungry, led a revolt with a Turkish army. Cities he occupied with Turkish garrisons remained Turkish forever. 10 years after Manzikert, Alexios I Komnenos seized the throne. He ended the decade of civil war. He inherited an empire in ruins. 4 years later, he sent emissaries to the Council of Piacenza. He asked for military help. Byzantine envoys presented the appeal to Urban II. But letters that reached Europe were different. Written by Western clergy hands. Contemporary historians proved they were forgeries. Peter Schreiner and Christian Gastgeber definitively proved Western clergy wrote the texts. The alleged letter to Robert of Flanders, a wealthy, influential count and expedition commander, said, "Christian blood flows in unprecedented scenes of slaughter. We beg you, bring to Constantinople all Christ's faithful soldiers." And further, lurid details, pure fabrication. Noble matrons and their daughters are raped like animals. Virgins before their own mothers, forced to sing obscene songs. You'll find all treasures and the East's most beautiful women. Alexios never wrote this. This was Western crusading propaganda. What did Alexios actually want? Mercenaries. Several thousand professional soldiers for service in the Byzantine army. Traditional diplomacy, pay others to fight. Controlled military assistance. What did he get? 8 months after the Council of Piacenza, Urban II called for the First Crusade at the Council of Clermont. 60 to 100,000 people. Men, women, children. Independent armies under Western leadership. Religious crusade, a concept foreign to Byzantines. Anna Komnena, Alexios' daughter, historian, witnessed to these events. In the Alexiad described her father's horror. Alexios heard rumors of innumerable Frankish armies arriving. He feared these people's incursions, having already experienced their attacks' savage fury, their mental fickleness, and readiness for violence. They were known for being always immoderate in greed and breaking treaties very easily. The Pope didn't issue the order. The Emperor begged for help and got much more and much worse than he asked for. Byzantium, which for 1,000 years stood between East and West, fell not only by the sword, it fell through its own pride. On the 27th of November, 1095, Tuesday, on the square before Clermont Cathedral, in France's heart, in the Auvergne region, Pope Urban II stood before a crowd. What he said that day triggered an avalanche. But did anyone ask why it was necessary? Urban II, born around 1035 in Châtillon-sur-Marne, elected Pope in 1088, was French, a Cluniac monk, reformer, politician. For years he fought anti-Pope Clement III, supported by German Emperor Henry IV. Now, at about 60 years old, he stood before his pontificate's greatest challenge. The Council of Clermont lasted from the 18th to 28th of November, 1095. About 300 bishops and abbots from all France and neighboring countries participated. The council addressed church matters, clergy reform, fighting simony, peace between Christian rulers. But on the last day, the 27th of November, Urban prepared something exceptional. The crowd was so large it didn't fit in the temple. The Pope spoke in open air in the square. Sources give different numbers, from several thousand to tens of thousands of people. There were bishops in purple Abbots in black, knights in armor, merchants, peasants, all came to hear the Pope. Nobody precisely recorded what Urban said. We have eyewitness accounts, written later from memory, by people with their own priorities. But certain motifs repeat in all versions. Urban spoke of the East, of holy places, of Jerusalem, of Christians living under Islamic rule, of persecution, of church desecration, of attacks on pilgrims, of Emperor Alexios's plea for help. He also spoke of something more. Just war, pilgrimage with a sword, indulgences, forgiveness of sins for those who take the cross and go liberate the holy city. This was new. Until then, the church taught war was necessary evil. Knights who killed, even in just cause, had to do penance. Now Urban said this war was exceptional. Participation would wash away sins. Pilgrimage with a sword. A new genre of holy expedition. When Urban finished, the crowd exploded with the cry, Deus vult, God wills it. People fell to their knees, wept, prayed, competed for who would pledge first. The Pope had red cloth crosses sewn and pinned to clothing as commitment signs. Hence the name, Crusaders. But let's look deeper. What did Urban actually say? We have 4 main eyewitness accounts, all written years after the event. Fulcher of Chartres, chaplain who went on crusade himself, Robert the monk from Saint-Remy Abbey in Reims, Baldric of Dole, archbishop, Guibert of Nogent, abbot. Each emphasized something different. According to Fulcher of Chartres, Urban spoke to the Frankish people and those from beyond the mountains, to people chosen and beloved by God. He spoke of news from Jerusalem's borders and Constantinople, that Christian lands were devastated by sword, plunder, and fire, that God's churches were destroyed or taken for foreign rituals. Then came the indulgence promise. Those who set out and lost life on the way, by land or sea, or died in battle against pagans, would receive absolution. Urban said God gave him authority to absolve sins for those who undertook this expedition. For many listeners, this was a new and stunning promise. Full forgiveness, not through penance, not through fear, but through deed. Robert the monk's version adds practical aspect. Encouragement to transform robbers into Christ's soldiers. Promise of wealth for those who'd lived by plunder. Prospect that war against barbarians could become a way to gain temporal and eternal reward. Baldric of Dole, in his account, developed social and economic motif. Land in Europe is too tight for growing population. Domestic wars and offenses between lords are frequent. Directing desire and violence outward to the Holy Land was meant to be a way to grasp new land, silence internal conflicts, and create order. Did Urban actually use all these formulations and examples? Probably not. Each chronicler added his accents. Fulcher highlighted religious motifs. Robert, sinner transformation. Baldric, pragmatic arguments. Guibert of Nogent added his own more moralizing interpretation and, in some versions, notes of anti-Jewish rhetoric. The common denominator was clear: call to action. Urban didn't literally say, "Go conquer foreign lands." He said, "Go reclaim what was once ours." He didn't order mass killing of unbelievers for profit. He spoke of restitution, restoring Christian authority over holy places that since apostolic times connected with Christ's name. In 11th century minds, such formulation sounded like just goal, moral justification for expedition. This doesn't excuse atrocities that came later, but it explains why thousands abandoned homes, families, and property, why they marched with crosses on chests and swords in hands. They weren't merely adventurers and butchers. Among them were people authentically convinced they served God's will. Deus vult, God wills it. And if God wills this, who could oppose? The First Crusade left Western Europe in the year 1096. It wasn't one army, but a great migration. Knights, soldiers, clergy, women, children, and elderly. Some sources speak of 60,000 participants, others 100,000. The truth probably lies somewhere between. They walked different routes through Central Europe and the Balkans. Godfrey of Bouillon led an army through Hungary, Raymond of Toulouse through Dalmatia, Bohemond of Taranto through Greece, all headed to Constantinople. Emperor Alexios I Komnenos waited for them with mixed feelings. On one hand, he asked for help. On the other, he got much more than wanted. He asked for several thousand mercenaries. He got an army larger than any Byzantine one in that century. Alexios had reasons for concern. Frankish knights were brutal, undisciplined, greedy. Some, especially Bohemond of Taranto, had their own plans. It wasn't only about liberating Jerusalem. They wanted to carve out principalities for themselves in the east. Alexios tried controlling the situation, forcing all crusade leaders to swear him fealty oaths, promises that all lands recovered from Muslims would be returned to Byzantium. Some swore willingly, others reluctantly. Still others lied. In spring 1097, the crusade crossed the Bosporus into Asia Minor. The first target was capturing Nicaea, capital of the Sultanate of Rum. The siege lasted 7 weeks. Crusaders surrounded the city but lacked equipment to break through powerful walls. Finally, Byzantines brought ships overland and placed them on the lake where Nicaea lay. Cut off from supply by water route, the city surrendered, but not to Crusaders, to Byzantines. Alexios outsmarted the Franks, negotiating capitulation with the Turkish garrison. Crusaders were furious, felt cheated of plunder. Next, the army marched through Anatolia toward Antioch. The march across Anatolian plateaus in midsummer was hell. Heat, lack of water, Turkish ambushes. People died from exhaustion. Horses fell. But Crusaders marched on. In early July at Dorilion, they clashed with the main Turkish army under Kili Arslan, Sultan of Rum. The battle was fierce, but Crusaders won. The road to Syria was open. October 1097. The crusade reached Antioch, one of the Middle East's largest and most fortified cities. Antioch's walls were over 9 meters high and stretched nearly 12 kilometers. The city lay at mountain's foot, with a fortress atop a hill. Capturing it by force was nearly impossible. Crusaders had no choice. They besieged the city and waited. The siege lasted 8 months, from October to June the following year. This was the entire Crusade's most brutal part. Winter came quickly. Crusaders lacked sufficient food, no shelter. They slept in tents or under open sky. Rain fell, then snow. People began dying from hunger and cold. Fulcher of Chartres, who was there, wrote, "A horse suitable for riding price rose to 1,000 coins, but one could rarely be found at that price. Many of our people fled to Cyprus or Ramla or returned to their homes. All wanted to escape, rich and poor. Hunger was so terrible, people ate horses, mules, donkeys, then cats, dogs, leather, leaves. Some sources mention cannibalism, people eating dead Muslims' bodies. Is this true? Hard to say. But true is that death from hunger and disease was daily reality. To all this came epidemics, dysentery, typhus, smallpox. People died by hundreds each week. Morale plummeted. Some leaders left the crusade. Count Stephen of Blois fled, claiming the situation was hopeless. History didn't forgive him. His wife, Adela of Normandy, was so ashamed she forced him to return to crusade several years later, where he died. Inside Antioch, Governor Yagi Sian prepared for long siege. He had food supplies, wells with water, strong garrison. But he also had a problem. Part of his people were Christians, Armenians, Greeks, Syrians. Would they be loyal to Muslim ruler when Christian armies stood at gates? The answer came on the 3rd of June, 1098. An Armenian guard named Firuz, controlling one of the wall towers, was bribed by Bohemond of Taranto. Firuz opened the gate. Crusaders poured into the city at night. What followed was massacre. After 8 months of hunger, fear, and suffering, Crusaders released emotions. They killed every Muslim they found, men, women, children, plundered homes, burned mosques. Yagi Sian tried to flee but fell from his horse and was killed. Joy was short-lived. 2 days later, the 5th of June, a relief army under Kerboga, Atabeg of Mosul, arrived at Antioch. Now Crusaders were besieged inside the city they'd just captured. The situation was worse than before. They had walls but no food. On the 14th of June, when the situation seemed hopeless, something remarkable happened. A peasant from Provence named Peter Bartholomew claimed he had a vision of St. Andrew showing him where the Holy Lance was buried, the lance that pierced Christ's side on the cross. According to the vision, it was buried in St. Peter's Cathedral floor in Antioch. Crusade leaders were skeptical, especially papal legate Bishop Adhémar of Le Puy. But Raymond of Toulouse, Count of Provence, decided to check. He ordered digging in the cathedral. Peter Bartholomew himself descended into the excavation. After several hours, he emerged holding a piece of rusted metal. He claimed this was the Holy Lance. Was it authentic relic? Probably not. Most likely Peter hid it there himself earlier. But it didn't matter. People wanted to believe. They needed a sign God was on their side. The Holy Lance gave them that sign. Morale exploded. Crusaders who days earlier were on capitulation's edge were now ready to fight. On the 28th of June, Crusaders left the city to face Kerboga's army. They were outnumbered, about 20,000 Crusaders against 40,000 Muslims. But they fought with desperation of men with nothing to lose. Kerboga's army, composed of detachments from many cities, wasn't well coordinated. When Crusaders attacked with insane determination, part of Muslim detachments fled. Kerboga's army disintegrated. Crusaders won. The road to Jerusalem was open. On the 7th of June, 1099, the crusade reached Jerusalem. The city was in Fatimid hands, a Shiite dynasty from Egypt that had recovered it from Turks a year earlier. Governor Aliftikar ad-Dawla prepared defense. He expelled all Christians from the city. He didn't want a fifth column inside. He poisoned wells outside walls. He gathered supplies. He waited. Crusaders had no time for long siege. It was summer. Heat was unbearable. Water scarce. Fatimids had poisoned every well in the vicinity. Crusaders had to walk several kilometers to find a source. People died from thirst. They had to attack quickly or die from dehydration. The problem was they lacked siege equipment. They tried building towers but lacked wood. The area was practically treeless. Fortunately, Genoese ships arrived at Jaffa, a port near Jerusalem, bringing wood, ropes, iron. Crusaders built 2 great siege towers and a ram. On the 12th of July, the assault began. Fatimids were prepared. They poured burning pitch on towers, threw stones, shot arrows. Crusaders died by hundreds. On the 14th of July, Raymond of Toulouse attacked from the south, Godfrey of Bouillon from the north. Battle lasted all night and all day. On the 15th of July afternoon, Godfrey's tower finally pushed against the wall. The bridge was lowered. 2 Flemish knights, Ludolf and Gilbert of Tournai, jumped first onto the wall. Others followed. Crusaders were in the city. What followed was one of history's most controversial massacres. Crusaders killed everyone they found, Muslims, Jews, probably some Christians they mistook for Muslims. Fulcher of Chartres wrote, "If you wish to know what was done with the enemy found there, know that in Solomon's porch and in his temple, our men rode in enemy's blood up to their horses' ankles." Raymond of Aguilera, chaplain to Raymond of Toulouse, recalled, "When our men entered the walls, one could see wonderful deeds. Some of our men, and these more merciful, cut off enemies' heads. Others shot them with arrows. Still others threw them into flames. In city streets and squares, one saw piles of heads, hands, and feet. One rode among corpses of men and horses. And further, come with us to Solomon's temple, where such slaughter occurred that our men waded in blood up to ankles, and in places up to knees." Ibn al-Athir, Muslim chronicler, wrote, "The Franks massacred Muslims for a week. They killed over 70,000 people in Al-Aqsa Mosque, among them imams, scholars, and pious people who'd left their homelands to live in this holy place. The number 70,000 is exaggerated. Jerusalem didn't have such large population. Modern estimates speak of 3,000 to 5,000 people killed. Still massacre, still crime. Jerusalem's Jews took refuge in the main synagogue. Crusaders set the building on fire with people inside. Nobody survived. Why? Why did Crusaders, who claimed to do God's will, commit such slaughter? Several reasons. First, exhaustion, fear, and frustration after 3 years of campaigning. Second, revenge for centuries of Islamic rule over Christian lands. Third, medieval siege law. If a city didn't surrender and had to be taken by storm, conquerors had the right to slaughter. Fourth, religious fanaticism. Crusaders truly believed Muslims were God's enemies who should be destroyed. This doesn't excuse the massacre, but it explains why it happened. The day after capturing the city, Crusaders went in procession to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. They wept, prayed, kissed the ground. Their journey's goal was achieved. Jerusalem, the holy city, was in Christian hands for the first time in 453 years. Was this revenge or recovery? Depends who you ask. For Crusaders, recovery of what Islam took by force. For Muslims, unprovoked aggression. Truth, as always, lies somewhere between. Syria, Palestine, Egypt were Christian for centuries. Islam took them by force in the 7th century. Crusaders recovered Jerusalem by force in the 11th. Muslims would recover it by force in the 12th, under Saladin, and so it would continue for centuries. Cycle of violence, revenge, and retaliation. For centuries, Crusades were perceived in Europe as heroic expeditions. Crusaders as heroes who fought to liberate holy places. Of course, critical voices appeared, especially toward cruelty, plunder, and attacks on Jews. But the general tone was positive. This began changing in the 19th century. For several reasons. First, Enlightenment critique of religion. Enlightenment philosophers Voltaire, Diderot, Hume condemned all religious violence, including Crusades. Second, Romanticism and Orientalism. European writers and artists began idealizing the East, the Muslim East, as exotic, noble, refined. In contrast, Crusaders were presented as barbaric, greedy, brutal. Third, colonialism. In the 19th century, European powers colonized the Middle East and North Africa. Wanting to justify their actions, they claimed to bring civilization to barbarians. But simultaneously, they wanted to distance themselves from Crusades, which were too openly religious war. So they began presenting Crusades as negative example of fanaticism, something from which modern colonialism was supposedly better. Fourth, 20th century Arab nationalism. When Arab nations fought for independence from European colonialism, they reached for crusades as symbol of Western aggression. Saladin, who defeated Crusaders in the 12th century, became national hero. Crusades, historical parallel to contemporary imperialism. Sir Stephen Runciman, British historian, published his 3-volume History of the Crusades in the 1950s. This was the first major English-language synthesis of Crusade history in decades, and was extremely critical of Crusaders. Runciman wrote with sympathy about Muslims, especially Saladin. He presented Crusaders as greedy, brutal, intolerant. His work had enormous impact on popular perception of Crusades. In the conclusion, he wrote, "In the long history of humankind, there was probably no episode more appalling than the First Crusade. The high ideal was polluted by cruelty and greed. Holy war itself is nothing more than an act of faithlessness toward God." Hollywood seized this image. Films like Ridley Scott's Kingdom of Heaven from 2005 presented Crusaders as fanatics and butchers, and Muslims as noble and tolerant. This was reversed image of medieval propaganda. There, Crusaders were heroes and Muslims barbarians. Now it was opposite. The problem is both images are false. Reality was more complicated. There were noble Crusaders and brutal Crusaders. There were tolerant Muslim rulers and Muslim tyrants. There were Christians who helped Muslims and Muslims who helped Christians. Alliances were made between them against common enemies, regardless of religion. This wasn't a simple story of good and evil. While Crusades were increasingly condemned, early Islamic expansion was increasingly whitewashed. Conquests of the 7th and 8th centuries, which within 100 years occupied half the Christian world, began to be presented as almost peaceful, tolerant, even welcomed by the conquered. Popular narratives claimed that populations of Syria, Egypt, and North Africa welcomed Arab conquerors as liberators from Byzantine oppression, that conversions to Islam were voluntary, that Christians and Jews lived under Islamic rule in harmony and tolerance, that Islam brought a golden age of learning, art, and culture, while Christian Europe sank into darkness. Part of this was truth, part exaggeration, part plain lies. Yes, some Christians welcomed Arab conquerors, especially those Byzantium persecuted for heresies. Yes, some conversions were voluntary, from conviction, desire for social advancement, tax relief reasons. Yes, Islamic caliphates achieved high cultural and scientific development. But, and this but is crucial, conquests were brutal. Tens of thousands died in battles, hundreds of thousands were enslaved, churches were destroyed or converted into mosques, Christians and Jews were second-class citizens, forced to pay special taxes, subjected to humiliation and restrictions. Conversions were often forced economically, socially, or directly. And here lies the most striking thing. When we speak of conflict between Islam and Christianity, we always speak of crusades. This is the reference point, symbol, example of Western aggression, fanaticism, barbarism. How many know that in the 7th century, Christianity was the dominant religion of the Middle East, and Islam a new small sect in Arabia? Few, because these events don't fit the contemporary narrative. The narrative says, West aggressive, East defensive, Christianity militant, Islam peaceful, Crusaders bad, Saladin good. But history is more complex. Islam spread by force, just as Christianity did earlier, just as every other religion or ideology that wanted to dominate. This doesn't make Islam exceptionally evil, but it doesn't make it exceptionally good either. Edessa, the first Christian kingdom outside Roman Empire boundaries, existing from the 2nd century, conquered by Arabs in the 7th. Who remembers this? Antioch, one of early Christianity's most important cities, place where Christ's disciples were first called Christians. Conquered by Arabs in the 7th century, recovered by Crusaders in the 11th, lost again in the 12th. Who speaks of this? Nubia, Christian kingdoms in today's Sudan that resisted Islamic expansion for centuries until finally falling in the 15th and 16th centuries. Who knows of them today? These stories vanished from common consciousness. One narrative replaced them, the narrative of Crusades. And Crusades are told in a very specific way, as unprovoked aggression of Western Christianity against peaceful Islam. But if you look at the full picture, history looks different. Islam conquered half the Christian world by force in the 7th and 8th centuries. Crusaders tried to recover part of these lands by force in the 11th. This doesn't excuse Crusade atrocities, but it places them in context. They weren't the conflict's beginning, they were its echo. A late, desperate, brutal response to 400 years of Islamic expansion. You stand today in Damascus. Under burning sun, you look at the old city walls. Stones beneath your feet remember the echo of monks' steps, deacons, bishops. In your mind, you hear bells that no longer ring. Where are their churches? Some endure, changed into mosques, their domes bearing crescents where crosses once gleamed. Others disappeared completely, replaced by concrete of the New World. Nobody remembers their names anymore. You travel further to Alexandria. Once it was the world's heart, a city where word met reason, home of scholars, theologians, saints. Today, it's a Muslim city, loud, chaotic, crowded. You enter a Coptic church hidden behind a high wall. Inside, half darkness and cool. Smell of incense, wax candles, and old parchments. A few old men pray in Coptic, a dying language. Words float in air like echo from 15 centuries ago. Descendants of pharaohs, Egypt's first Christians, a handful of people in a sea of forgetting. You fly to Tunisia, once Carthage, Hannibal's city, but also St. Augustine's, place where African Christianity was born. Where is Augustine's cathedral? Where are the churches of Cyprian and Tertullian? Gone. Only ruins, column fragments, mosaics buried in sand. Tourists take photos against the amphitheater backdrop. They don't know they're walking on a city where people prayed to the same God as in Rome. Sun burns, wind raises dust, memory sleeps. You return to Jerusalem, Church of the Holy Sepulchre, heart of the Christian world. You enter inside, crowds of pilgrims from around the globe. They pray, weep, touch the stone of anointing. But when you leave, you're in another world. Around you, Arab bustle, muezzin's calls, smell of spices, market sounds, shops with keffiyehs, miniatures of the Dome of the Rock, Palestinian flags, Jewish settlers with rifles, Israeli soldiers on patrol, Palestinian children playing soccer beneath the wall. Jerusalem, a city meant to belong to all, yet belongs to none, and to everyone simultaneously. Today we look at ruins, Antioch, Jerusalem, Constantinople, and see only stone. But beneath that stone still pulses echo of those days. Just stop, listen, and you'll hear prayers, moans, and silence after everything. And so ends this story, full of faith, betrayal, and blood. If you want to understand how that world truly looked, peer into other stories. On the channel, you'll find each crusade told separately, day by day, battle by battle. See how fanaticism was born, how cities fell, how prayer turned into screaming. Leave your mark, a thumbs up, subscription, comment. Write whether you knew it all looked exactly like this. Because as long as someone listens, history doesn't fall silent.